I was asked today if I wear green because I work at the Green Building Council. I actually don't. I wear very bright colours. So yesterday I was in bright pink. It just so happens today I'm in green. I'm going to be talking about an industry and government initiative that started in 2009 called Green Star Communities. And you'll see the partners involved in this, and the partners are local, state and federal, and the property and construction industry. And it really is around creating sustainable, productive and livable communities in Australia. The Green Building Council of Australia is one of 100 green building councils around the world. In Australia, we're an industry association like many associations you would be used to. But in some of the countries that you see up here, they're government-led. So in China and Singapore, for instance, they're part of a department. The learnings that we have as part of being part of this international network is that we have evolved really from a focus 10 years ago on the environmental attributes of buildings, which was really what the focus was when Green Star started, to a real shift to socio-economic and healthy buildings. The socio-economic has really been driven by the developing countries. It's all well and good to have a green-rated office building in Mumbai, but if it's surrounded by slums and does nothing for its local community, is that really a green building? So there's been a lot of work in the World Green Building Council network around what do our buildings actually mean in the communities where they are. And so we shouldn't just think of a building as a single entity. It is part of a bigger place. And there's been a lot of work in that space, including the Green Star Communities tool. So Green Star is an environmental rating tool with a lot of sustainability elements now coming into it. And the original tool very much focused on the individual building, the design of the building as built when it was constructed, interiors and the performance. And now we have the communities tool. It is a voluntary tool created by industry and government for the industry. I say industry and government because many of our landowners and big lessors are government. So it's a tool for anyone involved in the built environment. It's comprehensive. We're governed by the ACCC as it's a trademark certification scheme like the Heart Foundation TIC. And it was created by industry and government, as I said. So we look at rewarding best practice. So you have the National Construction Code, which is the old building code of Australia, and that's just a minimum standard that's required. The reason Green Star was developed is the industry wanted a framework. How do I know that building is green compared to the building next door? I can either make a bold claim or I can use a framework to prove it through documentation about how well I've gone in the design and construction of that building and in the elements that I've incorporated into it. And so this is just it shows you the star rating of Green Star, 6 being the highest. For those of you who've heard of the NABERS tool, which is managed by the New South Wales Government, that's incorporated into our energy category. I had to change this slide last night. The number of certified projects increases on a daily rate. If you look at office buildings in Australia, 20% on average of office buildings are rated to Green Star. We've been able to rate all building types except for individual homes, which is not an area that we originally looked at, but we're now looking at with our stakeholders. And buildings can be, there's a number of hospitals, schools, industrial facilities, a McDonald's, a fire station, a railway station, any building can be rated under Green Star. And it looks at 8 environmental categories. That's energy, water management, indoor environment quality, ecology, emissions, transport and innovation being the 9th. And you have to get elements, even though it's voluntary, you have to get elements in all of those categories. The objectives of the Green Star Communities pilot rating tool was to establish a common language in Australia for the planning, design and construction of our communities. Promote integrated thinking, recognise sustainability leadership, raise awareness about sustainable communities, and promote livable, prosperous, environmentally responsible communities that are underpinned by integrated design and strong governance. So a minute ago I mentioned the 8 categories that are incorporated into our buildings tools. These are the categories that are incorporated into our communities tool. And when we develop anything, we develop it in a very big stakeholder process. So I think over 1,000 people were involved in the development of this tool. And this is where we got feedback from all levels of government and the industry on what they were looking for in a rating tool for communities. And I will go into more detail. These are the government sponsors. For the first time in Australia, all government land organisations, now I know some of the names have changed, but all government land organisations created a partnership for this tool. And they, every time we did a pilot credit or category, it went into a group that they had created to look at and review. Even though it's a voluntary tool, the government land organisations were looking at a tool that could be national approach. So instead of New South Wales having one approach, Victoria having another, they said, why don't we work together to create a national framework that we can use for our communities? And these are the industry partners, many of those you'll recognise in the development of this tool. And I will say that we raised the sponsorship of this tool during the GFC without really trying. It just shows you the need that was there for this type of tool in Australia. And we're not alone. The UK have a tool known as BREEAM Communities, and the US has a tool, a LEAD tool for their neighbourhoods, LEAD for neighbourhoods. So it's happening all around the world. So there are 38 credits within the Green Star Communities tool. And it all adds up to 100 points, so it depends on how many points you get, whether you get a 4, 5 or 6. So I'm going to go into more detail in these credits and you might not be able to read them. But the point of putting this up is to show you the range of the credits that we developed, whether that's engagement, adaptation and resilience, urban design, access to amenity, healthy and active living, which I'm specifically going to focus on, affordability or green buildings. We really had to get, because of the types of communities that can be rated, we had to be quite broad in what we were looking at. So there is a real diversity of credits. And what's important about this is it's crucial when doing the Green Star Communities, using the Green Star Communities tool, that there's a feeling of collaboration around the projects. These are the credits and points that I talked about. You get a category score, you apply to each category and then get a 4, 5 or 6 rating. It's important to note the difference between communities and our Green Star tool. So if you think about Barangaroo, you have individual buildings, but then it's part of a whole community. One of the communities we have registered is a whole postcode. This tool is only for the whole community. That's what it's looking at. So under the green buildings credit, that would look at the individual buildings rated, and this approach is not uncommon internationally. And it's a voluntary and national, as I've said. So what are the community types? It ranges from a minimum of 4 buildings. So it could be a city block, which could be classified as a community because the buildings are working and talking to each other and there's shared elements between those buildings. So these are the types of projects that we have registered to Green Star Communities. So I'm just specifically going to look at the categories and credits very quickly. With governance, it's really important when you think about communities. They're a long-term project, can take 15 to 20 years. And people are there for a long, long time, and they want to make sure that it wasn't just lip service when that community was being developed. That they didn't go, oh great, this is a Green Star community, but once the developers walked away, that's it. So what is the governance wrapped around that community to ensure that those elements are kept and that they're managed over time? And so there's a lot of different credits in this category, including corporate responsibility, sustainability awareness, engagement that I've already mentioned, and environmental management. Design looks at site selection, site and context analysis, site planning and layout, and urban design. Livability, which I'll talk specifically about one of the credits, looks at access to amenity, community development, healthy and active living, access to fresh food, safe places, culture, heritage and identity, accessibility and adaptability. Economic prosperity looks at employment, economic resilience, education and skills, return on investment, community investment, affordability, incentive programs, digital economy and peak electricity demand. And environment, site sensitivity, ecological value, heat island effect, light pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, green buildings, potable water, stormwater, materials, waste and transport. A project doesn't need to get a point in each of those credits, but it has to get a minimum amount of points in that category. So it can't just look at some elements but not look at other. So it needs to look at elements within each of those categories. And then you have innovation, which recognises and rewards the spread of innovative practices and processes. So focusing just on Livability 3, which is our healthy and active living credit. And this credit has three components to it. The minimum requirement for this credit is footpaths on one side of all streets with speed limits of 60 kilometres and lower. There's an active transport component around good walking paths, cyclist facilities and public transport. And this is very much picking up what previous speakers have talked about. There's a recreational facilities component that looks at public parks, sporting facilities and how close they are to citizens. And then there's the healthy places, which looks at 5 different areas: walkability, good planning, way-finding elements, public spaces and encouraging social interaction. So this is the minimum requirement in active transport and facilities. And you can download just that component of the credit on our website. We're an open source organisation. And we've really worked closely with the National Heart Foundation and many other stakeholders in the development of this credit. And in the credit, we actually reference the New South Wales Government's Development and Active Living Guide. Whenever we create a rating tool, we don't reinvent the wheel. We look at standards and things that have already been developed. So in our buildings tools, we have over 150 references to other standards. So it really is just bringing in and creating a framework that's there so people have a guide. We have 28 projects around Australia that we're working with, and we've actually now had 2 international projects that are looking to register as well, because in some countries they don't have access to a tool such as this. From small inner city infill developments to large greenfield developments, housing hundreds and thousands of people. And I'm just going to focus on a couple to show you the differences in how this tool is being used. Many of you are aware of Barangaroo, and it was part of the working with the Barangaroo Delivery Authority that they had to achieve the highest international benchmarks, Green Star communities being one of those that they need to look at. Ultra energy efficient buildings and precinct infrastructure, a target of zero carbon waste treatment and commuter carbon emissions offsets. All the commercial buildings are looking at a 6-star design and as built, and the multi-unit residential 5-star. And you know, there's a lot of big focus on what we say TODs, PODs and GODs: transport orientated design, pedestrian orientated design and green orientated design in Barangaroo. Another one is University of Melbourne. They already have a number of individual buildings rated to Green Star, but they're looking at the whole university precinct. And then a different is Bowden Village in Adelaide. This community is a mixed-use, medium-density development with nearly 2,500 dwellings. And they've got a number of multi-unit residential buildings in this project, and 2 of those have already been rated. And what we've done with Bowden is we've worked with the South Australian department involved in this, and builders who've never used Green Star before. So we've done on-site training on using this tool, and this will be a really exciting precinct at the end. The other one is Brisbane Airport. Again, think about it, it is an enclosed precinct, and they're using Green Star communities as part of their property development master plan. And the other one, which is incredibly well known, is the Parramatta and the Parramatta Square development, which is a really exciting project, and I was fortunate to hear the Mayor talk about this last year at a Property Council event. It's a 3-acre mixed-use project targeting 5-star ratings for 5-star Green Star ratings for the buildings, and there's 6 stages of the developments, and they're also looking at an overarching Green Star communities development for the whole precinct. But it was just this is a great example of what communities, local communities, and industry can do in partnership together. So why different stakeholders would they be interested in this tool? For local and state government, agencies play a significant role in planning, plan making and improving development projects, and there's an opportunity to influence development projects through policy codes, guidelines and incentives. That being the case, we've developed a Green Star Communities Guide for Local Government, which will be launched at our Green Cities conference next month. And the aim is to help local governments encourage community development projects that enhance livability, contribute to local economic prosperity and deliver sustainable outcomes. The other people who use this tool are obviously developers, and they're our primary audience. But the reason it's crucial is they have an ability to influence more sustainable outcomes on the development of their projects. And the supply chain. When we originally launched the Green Star tool for buildings in 2003, I think we underestimated the impact that we would have on the supply chain. In those days, you couldn't get low VOC paint. Recycled concrete was something that most people hadn't heard of. And there's a lot of products and materials available today that you literally were not available then. But because of the way developers specify their projects, it really has had a positive impact on the supply chain. Not only that, the supply chain themselves have to be able to prove where their products have come from, what are the components of their products, and they also have to get them certified through product certification. So communities can also have an impact on the supply chain. And the community, the most important people in all of this, is the place for where those people live. I was talking before about I live on the Northern Beaches. There aren't any pedestrian walkways. For those of you who have ever been up there, you take your life in your hands when you're walking around the Northern Beaches and the L90 bendy bus, because there's nowhere to walk. You walk on the road, on those major roads, but there's no pathways. So much so, I was telling a story that my 12-year-old daughter has started a petition with one of her mates, and they've got over 1,000 signatures on it, which she's spoken to the mayor about, saying, you know, we're desperate for a pathway to ride our bikes. Because up there, we are a very active community on the Northern Beaches, but you put your life in your hands when you go for a walk. So with our new communities, there's no excuse. There is no excuse not to have a lot of these elements. They must have access to amenity. They must have access to public transport and the ability to ride and walk safely. So they really are the major beneficiaries of the Green Star Communities tool. So finally, why certify? It was interesting last night, I caught a taxi, and we have a joke at the Green Building Council about who knows what we do. It's called the taxi driver test. And I got one last night. And he said, what do you do? And I said, I work for an industry association. And he goes, well, what does it do? And I said, it's green buildings. And he went on this rant about a building in Seattle and then talked about all the environmental elements of the building. So I've won the taxi driver test. I have a taxi driver that knows what I do. But what was interesting is I then Googled the project that he talked about, and it starts with the greenest commercial building in the world, and it has no certification. So how do you know? Like, it has no certification to anything. It says it's registered to be certified, but it makes a very bold statement that it's the greenest building. Well, how do you know? What a bold, we would call that greenwash. So they're putting that up there saying, oh, look how green we are, but how do you know? And that's why the industry in Australia are looking for certification so that the consumers have a choice. I can go into that building and I know it's a 4, 5 or 6 star, or I can go into that building and I'm not sure of its rating, which ultimately might cost me more on water and energy. So that's one of the reasons why certification of not just buildings but a lot of elements is crucially important. It's independent, it's verifiable, and you can use it as a point of difference. Thank you very much.